What's up, Calvin? Thank you so much for taking some time to talk today.
Thanks for having me. Good to chat.
So for people who don't know, Calvin's a part of Compound. Compound's a leading lending exchange in decentralized finance. You might have heard of them through Comp and their governance token distribution, which has been going crazy. We've been covering Compound for a really long time. Obviously this has been a long time coming for them. So in this interview, I wanted to sit down with Calvin, who's head of ecosystem, and just talk about, the growth of Compound, what's really led to this point in time, and kind of like the reaction, right? Like I think it's been really, really crazy couple weeks for you guys. So I'm definitely curious to hear how things have been going on your side.
Yeah, it's been obviously a lot of fun, bit of a roller coaster, kind of stressful. It's more than kind of stressful. Ton of work leading up to it, and a very short kind of breath after comp launched. But then we're right back at it. We really think of this. We're basically 3 years into building Compound, and this is not the end. It's still just like inning two. We
Mhm.
have visions that are 100 times bigger for basically the protocol um, and its adoption.
Nice. Walk me through some of the early days at Compound. When did you join the project, and what did that look like when you first got involved?
Yeah, I joined in January 2018. I believe it was founded in roughly October or November 2017. I was the second employee. Um, so yeah, when I joined, we were the office was in an attic of an advertising agency actually.
Very nice.
So it was just very small, but basically one cubicle broken up into four cubicles. The early days, but uh, I mean, it's been a long time coming. The I joined in January 2018. We fundraised a strong seed round by April 2018. Version one of Compound was September 2018. So, it took 8 months to get from the point I joined to even shipping the first product, which really now, when you look back at it, it was an alpha. We shipped
Hmm.
version two of Compound in May 2019, like another 8 or 9 months later. Comp and governance ship basically early this year, another 8 or 9 months later. So like the pace at Compound on a daily basis has always been very high, like constant progress. But we kind of try to ship like these big, ideally game changing or sort of ecosystem shaping products, but quite slowly. It's truly a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to hear. You said you joined in January 2018. I think that obviously at that time there were a myriad of crypto projects, a million different people trying to get into crypto. What was it that stood out to you about Compound in particular and wanting to join that team among sort of everything else going on at that time?
Yeah, DeFi didn't exist at that time, right? I think actually Dharma had existed, and as a concept, I think had white papers. And now you look back and say that was kind of like the first DeFi concept.
Hmm.
At the time, they were a peer-to-peer lending protocol, and so DeFi didn't exist, and so it actually at the time Compound, the original idea for Compound was how could we build a bank on top of Ethereum? It seems like you have
Hmm.
the right stuff here to build a bank on top of this Ethereum network. But as we drilled further and further into the idea, it really narrowed the idea down to basically like, well, actually, what are the core primitives that you would need to even build a bank, which is very complex. And the core thing that was missing is these simple interest rate markets. At the heart of it, that's what a bank is. Like you put money in, they lend it to somebody, they take some interest, they keep some of it, and they give you a little bit. And that's the business model of a bank. So we decided to build like this primitive thing. But even at the beginning of Compound, we were figuring out how to define what we were doing because DeFi
Hmm.
didn't exist, Compound didn't exist. There was an idea, it got shaped through fundraising, telling the story over and over again. It got shaped through version one of the protocol and seeing how people used it and trying to figure out how to make it better. So it's easy in hindsight to be like, oh, because it was a great idea, but really at the time we were figuring it out. But
Right.
the reason that I joined, I say all that just as context because like the reason I was excited about Compound was not even so much that the idea was super clear at the time that it was like, oh, this is going to be the greatest idea on earth. Maybe Rob, our CEO, already knew that. I certainly was like, oh, this still needs to be figured out. But what was really compelling was actually that Rob and Jeff, the CEO and CTO, this was their third company together, and they knew how to start a startup. By the time you're on your third startup, 10 years in, they'd been training at it. And it was pretty easy to see that they were very good at decision making in actually a general startup way. Like there are a lot of decisions, I think, if you're a first time founder, you reach the decision point and you don't even know whether it's something important to spend time on or not. And so you could accidentally get distracted by things that aren't important. And it was easy to see that they could tackle, they knew how to sort of sequence the decision making, like what's important now, what's not important, but will be important later. So you spend time on the right things. That was actually what was really compelling.
It's really interesting because I feel like for them as founders, having done this a lot of times, they're confident in the decision-making process, as you said. But with this whole comp governance thing, you're kind of like taking the expertise you have, being like, okay, like, here you go, token holders, like, please make the decisions we would. What does that conversation look like internally for you guys? And what sort of led to being like, now's the time, let's do this?
Yeah. It stems from the idea of we truly very authentically believe that the protocol can have the most impact on the world if it's governed in a decentralized way. I think like even for me, when we talk about decentralized governance generally in crypto, I think there's a lot of decentralization theater, as people call it. There's a lot of systems that people are trying to decentralize or they call decentralized that really aren't. And I think it's possible that people are even underestimating how authentically we actually want to reach that goal for Compound to be totally decentralized. If Compound is going to be around in 100 years, assuming Ethereum is, then the only way is if it's community governed. And if it's going to be infrastructure that like every single bank of the future relies on for certain functionality, then the only way is if they all kind of are stakeholders in the system. So it is a really interesting thing you're highlighting that, like I said, I joined because basically like I could see the founders had made decisions before that would make this startup better. But now like just moving to decentralized governance, there's no best practices. It's not something that anybody has ever effectively really tried to do before. So they're all new decisions. And I think like the team is making them correctly, but it is it's a day by day transition. I think governance itself is like, it's no longer just a product, and it's no longer a product and engineering problem. You can't like optimize it and be done with it and then audit it and then leave it alone. It's like a human problem that evolves every day. So yeah, and in some ways it's like Rob, instead of he's like a steward of the entire community and also the CEO of the Compound Labs team. It's interesting transition.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that people don't realize about Comp was, as you highlighted in the earlier conversation, Comp was announced like, 6 months ago at this point, right? There was extensive testnet going on there. There was a lot of delegation before there was any monetary price associated with Comp. Can you talk a little bit through that rollout process and what teams could take away from the way that you guys introduced your token?
Yeah, I mean the biggest difference maker, the biggest difference between Compound and maybe other teams today that are thinking about rolling out a token or are rolling out a token is that I saw someone tweet this, like version 1 of Compound was launched in May 2018. The token launches June 2020, 2 years later. Meanwhile, a project like Balancer, which I think is super, super cool, but it launched in basically April and it has a token in June. And so Compound has a 2-year track record of safety where for the past 1 year, there was at any given time, $100 to $200 million of assets in Compound and never any incident. And that is the best sort of evidence you can have of the safety of a protocol like Compound. And I think that safety is uh, the most important thing for any project is protecting user funds, and it has been ours since day one. So that's, you obviously can't like shortcut your way to being around
Right.
for 2 years. But in terms of like the rollout itself, a lot of it, a lot of what we do at Compound is we say, okay, safety of user funds is priority one. Given that, what can we roll out that would work and we think would be effective, but also is not like, if it's wrong, is not the end of the world. So you
Right.
can see even now, like the comp distribution is being changed before our eyes on a day by day basis. Proposal 11, I saw you wrote about, DeFi
Hmm.
wrote about, um, is a big change. It's very different than the initial rollout just 2 weeks ago. And the great thing is that we built it in a way that it could actually be upgraded. And we're very fortunate to have a community of people who care about how it works,
Hmm.
so willing to invest time in analyzing it and getting to the right answer. And later, as more assets get added to Compound, as interest rate models change, as the market changes, this proposal 11 for comp distribution probably won't be the optimal again, and it will need
Hmm.
to change again. But I guess like I would say it's preparing for it. Like you said, we announced 6 months ago. There was a lot of time put into it from both a product perspective, engineering perspective, community building perspective. Um, the you know the rollout was slow. We did everything right. We've never really rushed at Compound, and I think you could see even like actually before Comp, the growth of assets in Compound had plateaued a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, but instead of thinking short term and being like, oh, we need to add more assets now, or we need to do something now, we always try to think long term for like bigger inflection points.
Yeah, there's two interesting points I want to go with that. First and foremost, I think that with comp, people are sort of underestimating the potential of governance itself. I think that everyone's excited about yield farming, getting comp to make a profit or something like that, but very few are talking about what you just highlighted with changing the comp distribution and the importance of governance. To that point, I would love to hear from your perspective, like who is the ideal participant in governance? Do you expect that your users should be voting yes or no, or do you encourage them to delegate to someone?
Uh, Certainly the direction it goes organically is where we want it to go. Like we can't we truly are not trying to guide anyone to do anything that in any direction. When we first envisioned the distribution of comp, though, our vision was that basically the applications on top of Compound that integrated the protocol would either accumulate comp or be in a position for their users to delegate their comp votes to them and represent the interests of their users.
Mm-hmm.
So what we wanted was kind of like the Fed or something like that, where there's 12 banks or something like that who kind of decide how the system that they're on top of works. Um, and what we imagined was that Dharma, Argent, one day, Coinbase, Binance would have these integrations with Compound where their users were using it and they themselves were using it. And then they could represent their own interests, like their own political party. So it was truly
Mm-hmm.
meant for applications uh, to to take a stand for themselves.
That's fascinating. Did you imagine the pace of proposals to be this fast? I know that we're on number 11 already, and it's been what, like 2 weeks? I think that probably we all underestimated how quickly these proposals will be integrated and sort of the magnitude of what's going on so fast has been.
Yeah, it is really fast. I would say that at least these one thing that sometimes I see people sort of uh, I think misperceive is how major these proposals are, at least from a safety perspective. So I think just from memory, all the proposals that have gone through so far are tweaks of existing parameters. So it's like there's code there, there's some variable that you can make that you can sort of turn a lever on, and people are just sort of turning those levers, but there's no new code, there's no new features, There's no new markets. It doesn't add any risk or sort of surface area of attack to the protocol. So it's okay if it changes very rapidly because it doesn't add any risk to the protocol. And so the scope of the proposals that have happened so far are actually pretty tight. Interest rate models, comp distribution. I expect that to slow down. What I'm really interested to see is when more major proposals happen. So like the first proposal to introduce a new asset market, perhaps, that actually impacts the economics of the protocol, the risk parameters, the safety of the whole protocol. And so that should happen much more slowly with a lot more discussion.
Yeah.
And even as that scope expands, it should hopefully be even slower. We do, like I said, we do want this thing to see compound grow for 100 years. So there's no rush to do everything up front. Hopefully it's closer to Bitcoin or Ethereum itself, which like hardly ever changes.
Yeah, it's really good framing. And I think you put it best when you said it's just minor tweaks to existing systems. I'm curious to hear, did you guys intentionally want to wait to add more? I don't want to frame them as like riskier things, because I think that we all agree that like expanding the protocol's capacity is something that a lot of people want to see. Was there any degree of like intentional approach to waiting to potentially add more volatile assets until this distributed governance went live? Or what does that conversation look like internally?
Yeah, it, uh, I think the core of it is actually that like adding assets was always kind of attractive as a low-hanging fruit thing to growing the usefulness of the protocol. But we were always trying to think about long-term, how can we achieve a 10 to 100x vision, not adding an asset that is a fraction of the size of Ether and increasing assets in the protocol by 20 million, for example. It was more about how do we achieve an inflection point like the one we've just had, where we went from 100 million to a billion. And so that just always took priority. And we knew that assets could come later through the governance system. And also the, I guess, I sort of lost my train of thought because I heard something outside. But
No worries.
But basically, yeah, we think it can come through the governance system. We always wanted to take kind of like a longer term view towards the features that we were adding. So I think hopefully there will be many, many more assets, but I think the most useful one are stablecoins and Ether to date. So the other ones make as much of a difference so far.
Yeah, and speaking of that, what's your take on sort of the rippling effects we've seen with both basic attention token and then sort of what DAI is kind of preparing for ahead of like, you know, proposal 11 change? Did you guys foresee like rippling effects happening at all? What's your just take on sort of the general notion of that?
We didn't. We didn't see it. I think honestly, we didn't expect this type of uptake by the ecosystem. We thought it would be slower, basically, and more gradual. So it all came very fast, and so actually, it's a good thing that governance is also able to move very fast to react. Obviously, what's happening with BAT is inorganic. Proposal 11 should fix it, or at least take it in the right direction. In just 2 weeks after launch, and really like the BAT trade, I guess, was discovered like a week ago, so it responded pretty quickly. What's happening to Maker is just really interesting as a fan of DeFi, because it's like, yeah, it's crazy to think about the two systems interacting. Compound and Maker have always had a pretty closely tied relationship, actually, but Compound, I guess, was never big enough till now to affect Maker to this extent.
Right.
You know, selfishly as an individual, what I care about most is that Compound users are safe. And so that's always going to be priority one that I hope to see come through the governance system beyond what happens to other systems. Although obviously I care as like a huge fan of DeFi and a user of these other systems. But yeah, what I'm paying attention to is that Compound is safe.
Yeah, and I think to your point, that inflection point you were talking about, the comp distribution signaled like a lot of centralized players getting involved with DeFi for the first time. Like for example, I noticed that Nexo is taking a lot of their assets and yield farming with like, basically like a centralized lending pool and putting that in a different one. We saw FTX getting into the balancer game and stuff like that. So it was interesting. It's not something that I foresaw either, but it's interesting to consider the magnitude of some of these giants that have had years of lead time in acquiring liquidity, partaking in these systems that were to some degree designed for like DeFi power users, right? Like people who have maybe little shares, but like are very knowledgeable, trying to like compete or even like, I don't know if compete's the right word, but just like interact with these huge players with like endless amounts of capital and still being rewarded fairly for that.
One of the interesting things about, I guess, like the history of Compound is actually since the very beginning, it's been largely my job to talk to like these large hedge funds for the past 2 years. And for 2 years, most of them, the Three Arrows, the Galaxies, Alameda Research from FTX, they're like, okay, this is cool, but we're not going to use it. It's either too small or it's too risky. And with the introduction of comp, they all piled in. So actually, like, I know who some of the players are, and some of them are massive, and some of them have put in huge amounts of capital into Compound. And one of the reasons I think that they're willing to do that is because Compound has this track record of safety over several years. Like even when FTX, I think I'm right on this, that when FTX put all those tokens into Balancer, they put $90 million, right? But I believe that the tokens, like they maintain centralized control over them so that they couldn't actually be redeemed for value if they were hacked or stolen. So it was sort of risk free to them. So they weren't actually putting $90 million of capital at risk. But I think that you'll see like Compound experience an outsized amount of capital flowing in due to liquidity mining because these large funds trust it because it's been around for longer. But yeah, I got messages from some great funds basically along the lines of like, none of us have ever had DeFi positions on before, and now everybody does. So hopefully Compound's played a small part in bringing CeFi to DeFi.
Yeah. What's your take on like, obviously DeFi has been doing really well for the past year. I think any of us working here have recognized all the hard work that's gotten us here. I think that it was really the comp distribution that kicked off this yield farming meme, right? And it becoming center stage for everyone that has anything to do with crypto. How does that feel to kind of be the one that pioneered this new wave of like DeFi is really the thing and people should pay attention to
it? People have said like over the past 2 weeks, so it feels like Compound has single-handedly kicked off a new bull run potentially. And it doesn't feel real. I don't know. We're inside Compound. I am very active in other projects and as an investor as well. And so it's certainly fun, but I don't think we can claim the credit. It was sort of, there's a fuse waiting to be lit in DeFi. A lot of projects have been shipping a lot of really cool things. Before comp launch, so many cool things. Ren was in process already with Ren BTC. Synthetics has been doing awesome stuff. Keep Network is about to launch. UMA is doing really cool stuff. I mean, it's just a fuse waiting to be lit. Hopefully what happens is that this type of yield farming thing draws in outside participants. I feel like the DeFi sort of, what's happening, all the interest in DeFi is still within a pretty small crypto community. And I remember from like 2017, 2018, that when things really blow up is when people who aren't even in crypto are hearing about these things and involving these things.
I think to your point about user safety, it's interesting to consider the varying degrees of yield farming. So one thing that I really like about Compound is you can just lend passively to a protocol with a proven track record. Obviously, you can go deeper down the rabbit hole. And maybe to add my own opinion here, the one thing I didn't like about this new yield farming meme is we were encouraging people to take out leveraged positions on Compound borrows to earn comp tokens, right? And I think that there's other instances where we're, as a community, encouraging people to take on risky positions to sort of yield farming to the max. So I'm trying to figure out like what the middle ground is. And maybe as a direct question to you, as someone new to DeFi or that's new to this whole yield farming craze, like what's a good starting point, or what's like a safe yield farming thing that you can expect to partake without obviously being at risk?
Yeah, gosh, it's I would hesitate to make this sort of investment recommendation type of thing, and in fact, I don't think I'm allowed to. But the I can obviously give my own personal sort of thoughts on the matter. It is really hard, I think, as someone new to DeFi to come in and understand all the risks that there are, or to have any sense of quantifying them. Like,
Right.
this protocol is twice as risky as this protocol or something like that. I'm quite biased to say that I think Compound is one of the is the most proven option out there. But even so, there was like a tweet going around a week or two ago of like a stablecoin to stablecoin yield farmer who got liquidated because
Yep.
he or she didn't think about the interest that would accumulate on their borrowing position. And that's pretty basic thing to think about if you're very familiar with these systems. Um, so, like, quite frankly, it depends on your risk tolerance. If you want to be perfectly safe, you still don't do it. And it's not just because of protocol risk or economic risk. It's even like the management of your own private keys.
Right.
Uh, your computer gets wiped and you didn't save your MetaMask private keys or something like that. But if you wanted to pick one thing to do, I would say, like, I personally think one of the safest assets is probably USDC,
Mhm.
and and then one of the safest protocols is Compound, and so some combination of things there. If you just provide USDC to Compound and that's it, and you don't do anything else, you're still probably beating your bank savings rate by like 100x, and
Yeah.
you're just relying on basically Coinbase to be trustworthy with their bank accounts.
Yeah, and I think maybe even taking a step back from like the yield farming discussion, I think the real value behind what we're seeing going on is like using a protocol to get a say in the future direction of that protocol, right? And that model, I think, is something that's been one that I've thought about for crypto as a long time that it enables. But I think it's really this DeFi trend and this new wave of tokens that we're starting to see that. Can you talk about like where you're seeing that elsewhere in the community and sort of like what this might inspire in the future as far as something that sets crypto products apart from legacy counterparts?
Yeah, it's extremely exciting. I'm pretty impatient to see it play out. Obviously, we have a long-term view, and the comp distribution is kind of slow, like around 3,000 comp a day. You need 100,000 to make a proposal. So even as just a huge user, it's going to take you a long time to get enough comp to make those types of proposals. Being able to be delegated to makes a difference. But it's amazing watching our leaderboard and seeing
Mhm.
people move up because other people want to delegate to them. Um, we have data on like a dashboard on Dune Analytics that shows how many people are delegating to different people. So at this point, like Andreessen Horowitz has almost 100 different addresses delegating to them to represent them in Compound. They're not even that active in governance. It's partially because the list is alphabetized, or it's just by amount of votes, and they're near the top, and people just click the first one. So I hope
Right.
people eventually get a little bit more sophisticated about who they actually choose to represent them. But I mean, it's crazy. I do it in I participate in governance on other projects as well. It's so crypto native. Even the idea, even before tokens, just the idea that if you find a project and they don't have a Telegram or a Discord where you can talk to their team or talk to other community members, that's weird. Like,
Yeah,
I
that's a good
less
point.
to use that product. Like, the whole thing is community oriented. So it's very native to start to attach a token to it that represents your economic interests in it, potentially, that let you have even a clearer say. There's a lot of room for more infrastructure there. Like,
Hmm.
the forum that compound proposals are discussed on is on Camaraderie. It was
Hmm.
made by a member of the community. We didn't make the team didn't make it, and it's like it doesn't have a lot of options I wish were there. So DAO projects like Aragon and DAO Stack are getting a lot of traction as well. Obviously, Compound didn't build using one of those. We sort of the team kind of decided to go more streamlined and build just what we thought the protocol needed, rather than adopt something like that. But I'm super excited about it. Um, Other governance systems are like I've done some UMA votes. Uh, um,
You guys should help UMA out with their voting dashboard.
yeah, it's a little rough. They get to improve on that. Yeah, it's pretty confusing. You can't even say yes or no. You have to do 1 or 0,
Right.
which feels like it could be a decently simple UX fix. But
Well, I guess in that vein, like, what are you guys thinking of building next for Compound Labs? Like, are you thinking of doing extensions to governance? Like, what's kind of the discussion now about where you guys contribute to the project?
yeah, so we're done with handling the core protocol. That's handed over to the community. We're going to obviously assist. We'll be there. We'll educate. We'll be involved. But that's done and handed off. Um, as I sort of alluded to before, our rate of shipping is like every 6 or 8 months, something comes out. So it's going to be a while in crypto terms, I think, before there's anything public about what we're working on. What I will say at a really high level is this framework we kind of have for, we think, the steps towards achieving kind of a holy grail of like interest rate protocols, which is uncollateralized borrowing. We kind of, my take on it, at least based on our internal discussions, is you're starting to see projects basically represent Bitcoin on Ethereum. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an off-chain asset off of Ethereum on a different blockchain that can be represented on this blockchain. Is there a way to maybe generalize it so that it could be any off-chain asset, not another one that's on a blockchain? And then maybe one day you get to a point where you can represent a wide variety of off-chain assets on Ethereum and use them as collateral. Uh, and then maybe one day you get to a point where you can represent like intangible off-chain assets, like reputation or identity or something like that. And that's the general sort of idea direction that we're going. I think it's going to take months to see something ship out of Compound, but I think it will be in that general direction. And it will
Yeah.
probably be, yeah, and then how and if it ties into the original Compound protocol, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
Definitely. Well, I think that we could talk about Comp forever here. So I know that you are a busy man. I'll let you get on with your day. But any closing thoughts you have for people watching this about, how to get involved with the Compound community, how to participate more in governance? I know you mentioned the camaraderie site. What are some good places for people to join the conversation?
Yeah, our website, compound.finance, has a ton of information. The team's Discord, compound.finance/Discord, is a great place to just jump in and ask questions. All of the team is there. The resources like DeFi Rate are absolutely fantastic. One of, if not the best place that aggregates a bunch of information about how Compound works, how to participate in governance, how-tos, comments on proposals. Compound's governance system is one of the first, I think, where as a user or a comp holder, no matter how little comp you have, you can really have a voice and you can ask for people to delegate their votes to you. It doesn't require anything from them except sending a transaction, and you can really influence something that should hopefully have a huge impact on the entire crypto and decentralized finance ecosystem. So yeah, I would encourage people to check it out. I'm really excited to see where it goes. And it's not up to our
Definitely.
team anymore. It's up to the community and people like DeFi, right?
Thank you, man. I mean, to return the favor, us getting delegated some comp was like a huge win for us internally. As I said, we've been keen on this trend for a long time, and sort of, it's good to see like when you put hard work into something, it gets recognized. And I almost like that the way you guys went about your delegation was very intentional, right? Like people had to show a genuine interest in what you were doing to sort of, have a bigger say in that conversation.
Yep. Yep. Awesome.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And for those who need to stay up with Calvin, be sure to check him out on Twitter. I'd say it's probably the best place to get in touch, right?
Yeah. CJLIU 49.
Awesome.
I should make it easier, but.
Perfect, man. Thank you very much for your time, man. I'm looking forward to getting this live so people can check it out.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
See ya.